learn slangs for their language courses help us to understand.
That language is not only made out of
They are going to become like rude, or they just only focus.
So obviously, I think that for official international tests, it is really important to.
context. So the person needs to know exactly.
Hello, what's your name?
Hello, I'm Samuel Kubojo, professor of the bachelor degree in foreign languages here at the University.
Can I ask you some questions?
Of course, I don't have any problem.
Okay, the first. Do you believe that learning the slangs help students understand native speakers better? Why or why not?
Yes, of course. Slangs have cultural meaning. That means that the students that learn slangs for their language courses help us to understand more natural and daily Anglo-phonetic context. So for that reason, I think that learning slangs is a really good strategy for students to try to understand better native people.
The second one. In your opinion, what is the best way for a teacher to appropriately introduce the topic of course in an English class?
Oh my God, curse words always are like how to say it, like a polemic topic in class because how our particularly curse obviously and classroom is so academic, so formal. Like it is kind of difficult to approach this particular language to students. I believe that the best way to to approach this particular kind of vocabulary to the students are showing that our words that are being used naturally in daily context that are not particularly used for some contexts that are not maybe demonized or things like that, but are words that, despite the fact that they are coarse, are gonna help them, the students, to understand better context that maybe they are not into regarding the formal of the academic English classes process. So for that reason, I think that maybe course words are a really important topic, but it's really difficult in every single class like to approach it to the students.
What risk could a student face if they use informal expressions without fully understanding their cultural context?
That obviously, if they don't understand the full of the context of the slang or particularly the informal expressions, maybe at the moment of the students to try to use the informal expressions with a native or another kind of context that are not the appropriate one, they're gonna get misunderstood, right? Or they're gonna, maybe have some kind of problem because they're not using like proper slang and maybe the other person is trying to understand other different things. So for that reason, I think that I would recommend to the students to first try to understand fully the slang or the informal expression before to try to use it in the particular context, because otherwise it will be kind of stressful, the context.
Do you think exposure to movies, music, and social media is an effective way to learn informal English? Why?
It depends on the type of learning the students, right? As an example, there are some students that get along with English without listening to music or watching movies, just with reading. I don't know, it depends, right? Of course, like music in general and now movies are a really good way to approach the students to this kind of informal English, right? And I'm saying that it's bad. I'm saying that maybe it doesn't work for all students, right? But of course, it is a way to have authentic material of this particular topic, because obviously in the textbooks that we use for English classes, we're not gonna see this particular informal slang for using your daily context. No, it is a really good approach, it's a really good material, authentic material, but I think that it doesn't work for all students. So it is like contradictory in that particular way. It works, but no, it works for all the students.
Should slangs and idioms be included in official English exam, or do you think they belong only in everyday communication?
In everyday communication, of course, right? Because it's like in Spanish, we doesn't or we talk like formal every day, right? But in official English tests, I consider that are not appropriate for including this particular slang because of that, because it's official, because it's formal. Yeah, one thing is what do you present, and the other thing is how you use it, right? So obviously, I think that for official international day, right? But in official English tests, I consider that are not appropriate for including this particular slang because of that, because it's official, because it's formal. Yeah, one thing is what do you present, and the other thing is how you use it, right? So obviously, I think that for official international tests, it is really important to keep this formal, structured way to talk about in English, right?
Hi, teacher Sebastian Concha.
hello, Dari.
Number one, do you believe that that learning slang helps students understand native speakers better? Why or why not?
Yeah, I believe so. I do believe that it's really important to learn slangs. Let's say that language is not only made out of formal structures or formal like vocabulary or common vocabulary, yet when we interact with our friends, our family, our teachers, or any other person, we use a great amount of slangs or informal expressions. So we need to, if we are going to interact with native speakers or we are going to watch a movie or something like that, it's really important to get familiar with these slang expressions.
Number two, in your opinion, what is the best way for a teacher to appropriately introduce the topic of course or in an English class?
I had the opportunity to have a collaboration online international project with a professor at the University of Michigan, and we had this topic of taboo language. And one of the topics was actually curse words. So there was an analogy, and the professor there said that she says that like language is a it's like a like a human body or like a body. Yes, you study the beautiful parts. Yes, like the head, the face, the hands. But also you need to examine. You need to analyze also the not beautiful parts, like the intimate parts or the ones that people don't talk about, because anyway, that is part of the language as well. The body, yes, a doctor needs to study all the body. So we need to study all the language with its parts or its areas, regardless if they are taboo or not. What is really important is to set up some rules on that this is just to study and not to use them against any other person.
What risks could a student face if they use informal expressions without fully understanding their cultural context?
So the risk is that they can use it with the wrong person in the wrong context. That is the main risk. Yes, because there are some words, there are some expressions that are accepted. Yes, there are socially accepted in some countries, in some communities, with certain people in some countries. Yes, but the same expressions or the same info or the same vocabulary is not accepted in other contexts. So the person needs to know exactly.
What risks could a student face if they use informal expressions without fully understanding their cultural context?
So the risk is that they can use it with the wrong person in the wrong context. That is the main risk. Yes, because there are some words, there are some expressions that are accepted. Yes, there are socially accepted in some countries, in some communities, with certain people in some countries. Yes, but the same expressions or the same info or the same vocabulary is not accepted in other contexts. So the person needs to know exactly if they know it and they know what they're not allowed. Otherwise, they're going to be banned. Yes, but absolutely, yeah. There are some words in which, yeah, if they are so strong, so they might be banned. on YouTube, or they might be banned in other streaming. But I've seen that in other series or in other movies, so they are not banned, or you can hear all the expressions they use. So yeah, absolutely. What's important is that the person that just doesn't just hear that and whatever, but to be conscious what it means and to use it properly.
Should slang and idioms be included in official English exams, or do you think they belong only in everyday communication?
Well, let's say that due to the to international policies regarding exams, yes, there are some rules that had to be established. So in terms of informal expressions, slangs, curse words, they might vary from country to country. And these exams don't evaluate exactly if you are familiar with a specific dialect, but if you are familiar with general English. So I think that I would say no, it is not necessary, or it isn't. That is not the purpose of official English exams, because official English exams are just to examine or evaluate that you have the competences in a general English context. Yes. Now that if you are going to interact with people from one place or the other, then you can go further. But this would be like part of our everyday communication, like part of your competences that you're going to use in your everyday life.
Okay, thank you, Professor Sebastian. I'm sorry, that would be all.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for taking me into account. And then I will be attentive. All right?
Hello, I'm here today with Professor GC. I'm going to ask him a couple of questions about teaching slang. The first question, do you believe that learning slang helps students understanding native speakers better? Why or why not?
Well, yeah, understanding slang is a very important part of learning English. And not only English, I mean in every language you should learn, or which will be like involved in the process of learning. Slang is an essential part of this process. Why? Well, because this is the way the people speaks on their daily basis life, you know. So we use slang in our Spanish every day, different contexts, almost all the time. So if you want to be fully immersed in an English word, or in an English content, or in an English, how could I say, like in an Anglo-speaking context, it's very important to know the slang. You know, like for example, I'm going to use like this example. Maybe it's not, doesn't show in the best way how it be. But for example, I remember some of my friends back in any city I'm not gonna mention. They used to say when they saw this beautiful lady and they said something like, "Oh, what a rack!" So if you don't understand something like that, you know, it's gonna be difficult for you to get fully immersed on the sense of a conversation. It's going to be difficult for you to fit in, you know, it's going to be difficult to fit in a group if you don't know slang. So basically slang is important in terms of belong to a community. So learning slang is very important. It helps you basically belong and understanding like hundreds of different conversations in different places. What is difficult about slang is that every city, every state, or each country, I could say, they have different kinds of slang. So we have British slang, "Really, mate." We have classic slang, like for example, "Oh, we spent the whole day punching cattle." For example, that's like Texas slang. So it's part of daily life. You won't fully understand English native speakers if you know it. So it's very important. On one hand, in order to belong every day, different contexts, almost all the time. So if you want to be fully immersed in an English word or in an English content or in an English, how could I say, like in an Anglo-speaking context, it's very important to know the slang. Like for example, I'm going to use like this example. Maybe it's not, doesn't show in the best way how it be. But for example, I remember some of my friends back in any city, I'm not gonna mention, they used to say when they saw this beautiful lady and they said something like, "Oh, what a rock!" So if you don't understand something like that, it's gonna be difficult for you to get fully immersed on the sense of a conversation. It's going to be difficult for you to fit in. It's going to be difficult to fit in a group if you don't know slang. So basically, slang is important in terms of belong to a community. So learning slang is very important. It helps you basically belong and understanding like hundreds of different conversations in different places. What is difficult about slang is that every city, every state, or each country, I could say, they have different kinds of slang. So we have British slang, "Really, mate." We have classic slang, like for example, "Oh, we spent the whole day punching cattle." For example, that's like Texas slang. So it's part of daily life. You won't fully understand English native speakers if you know it. So it's very important. On one hand, in order to belong a community or group in which you will be like involved or living in, and on the other hand, if you want to understand what the people have to really say, for example in movies, podcasts, TV series, people uses tons of slang. So if you don't handle or you don't know slang, you're going to be lost in the context of many conversations.
Your opinion, what is the best way for a teacher to appropriately introduce the topic of cursing words in an English class?
Well, that's a good question because it's not only in English classes, also in the other languages. We have this cursing, this swearing, these bad words, this cursing. Well, and I understand the concern of many of the colleagues that say, but if you teach your students that, they are going to become like rude, or they just only be focused on slang. So it might happen that a deviation could come in the learning process of the students. So yeah, it's important to establish the different kind of context in which you'll be able to use cursing, right? Like actually cursing by itself, well, it's a way of understanding it, but you know, many native speakers won't consider cursing as an advantage or as a skill, you know. I think that there is an important context in order of understanding the urban language in a way of understanding, for example, movies, understanding, for example, hip hop songs, understanding how to be or how to live in a community. But actually cursing by itself is something that won't come as natural as it seems, because cursing, as we do in our own language, in our native language, is something that comes up in certain type of situations, when you're hurt, when you're mad, when you're pissed, yeah, when you face situations that aren't favorable for you, you might curse naturally in your native language. So, cursing by itself, it will be the result of a process in which you naturally develop the understanding of English, in this case, that naturally develop the understanding of the language. So once this language turned out to be natural for you at time of expressing, you'll be able to curse in a natural way. Otherwise, it'll be artificial, or many of our students, for example, they fool many times, like saying swearing or cursing words, but it's not like a connection of many words and that you create a chain of swearing like a natural native speaker will do. So it's just like a game. So in which context you could design games for teaching swearing, but it's important to know that you have to be very careful with the content of this, because when you swear, you express different levels of communication. So you must understand when you want to hurt someone, or when you just swear by itself, or when you just want to be funny with your friends, and you know, just trying to be natural swearing. So you could teach context in which, you know, which of these words or what do they words mean and what they really mean in English, because in your native language it changes. It's different, the meaning of so many of these words. So you must design a context in which your students fully understand what do they words mean and what they really mean in English, because in your native language it changes. It's different, the meaning of so many of these words. So you must design a context in which your students fully understand what's the meaning of cursing and swearing by itself, how to do it, and take it as a resource, also for understanding other people. But I think that swearing and all that is the last part of learning a language. It shouldn't be the first, but curiously speaking, one of the first things you learn in any language is swearing and cursing. So it works as a gate entering into a language. So it could be at the beginning, or it could be at the really end of learning process.
What is called a story phase if they use informal expression which goes fully understanding their cultural context.
Well, one of the risks students could face if they misuse cursing, swearing, or any other kind of informal vocabulary is that, well, in the academy, you might fail exams or interviews if you swear. It's a kind of vocabulary that is not accepted in formal environments, so it should be clear for you that, I mean, you're not supposed to swear or being very informal if you're in a job interview or in an exam, yeah, or if you're speaking with a principal in the school, or for example, if you're trying to obtain the American visa. So, well, those will be contexts in which you're not supposed to be swearing or cursing or using way too many formal expressions. So it's important to understand when and how. For example, if you are in a natural environment in which you are living in a city or interacting with people, and you misuse this kind of vocabulary, you could offend someone, you could make angry the wrong people, and you don't want to make angry because bad things might happen. So it's very important to know when and how. And if it's possible, try to never use it. But if you don't use it, there might be the risk of, if the time comes up for this kind of communication, well, this person might not understand what's going on, and sometimes cursing could save your life, or sometimes could put you in trouble. So it's interesting. So you must establish in which context you are supposed to be swearing and cursing and using informal vocabulary, and keeping in mind that if you're going to be playing with this kind of vocabulary, every city, every country, every state has different kind of slang and vocabulary. There is this kind of universal slang, but there is also this kind of vocabulary that just belongs to very specific places in the world. So basically, those are the risks of misusing this kind of language.
Do you think exposure to the movies, music, and social media is an effective way of learning informal English? Why?
Yeah, of course. So through movies, podcasts, YouTube tutorials, basically it's the only way of getting involved in this everyday communication, because we are not living in that country, so we're using an artificial construct we used in order to learn this kind of vocabulary. But movies, seeing how the urban vocabulary has possessed almost all forms of communication, this vocabulary that was born in the 80s, right? Now this vocabulary has switched and evolved in a way that had a certain way become universal. So that's a good example. And how could you see that, for example, in music? How the pop music has evolved in this way, movies, sitcoms. So if you keep an eye always, in this media, listening and regarding to the language that's being used in there, you'll find this exquisite evolution of language through the past of the decades, and perceiving how the only way you could perceive this evolution, if you are outside of the country, of course, so you'll be able to perceive this only through media. It's very difficult that just the interaction with only a teacher will bring you the full richness of this experience. It's something that you must deal by yourself.
Show slang and idioms are included in official English exams, or do you think they belong only to everyday communication context?
Well, it's a good question because it depends. If you are teaching in a class or in a lesson, everything, idioms are important. Many different expressions they're used to express and communicate in so many different ways. Yeah. Slang, well, it's important to understand how slang and regular English are in somehow how opposed one to another, or how the interaction of those occurs, like especially in informal situations. Actually, many master programs of master studies include the study of slang or idioms and all these kind of words as variation of the language, as an evolution of a living language, because it's important to understand that a language is like an organism. It's alive, it's evolving, it's moving, it's growing at the pass of time. So it's important to analyze the language in this way as a phenomenon that occurs in this way. It's changing, it's alive, it's always evolving. So accents are changing, words that were widely used at some era are not used anymore and are considered like archaisms, words belonging to the past, used by ancestors, used by other people. Many of these expressions crystallize. That is one of the phenomena that we study in linguistics, and we study how this evolves and change. So definitely not teaching this in an initial state of the language, but later on when the level or the master studies demand this kind of competencies, this kind of skills, and especially if you are learning how to be a professor or becoming an expert in the language, definitely is something that you should analyze, study, and find a way to be introducing little by little this in your English classes in order to make your students more proficient, help them trying to find a way in which they are going to be able to interact in a successful way, in this case in English. Thank you very much.